She walked into the restaurant with hope burning in her chest, but within an hour that hope turned into the cruelest humiliation of her life. Maya Delgado, a young woman who had spent years cleaning the mansion of a man who never truly saw her, found herself abandoned at a table for two, her heart breaking with every passing minute. What she didn't know was that someone else was watching from the shadows, someone whose decision that night would shatter every boundary between their worlds and change both of their lives forever. The cracked mirror in Maya Delgado's one-bedroom apartment reflected someone she hardly recognized. For 24 years, she had worked quietly, blending into the background of other people's lives. Tonight, though, as she slipped into a navy blue dress that her best friend Lena had insisted she borrow, she almost looked like someone else, someone braver. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the fabric, feeling every stitch remind her that this dress wasn't hers. The borrowed black heels pinched her feet, but Lena's words echoed in her head. At least once in your life, Maya, you have to try. For 3 years, Maya had scrubbed floors and polished glass inside the Bel Air estate of Graham Whitmore, one of the most respected businessmen in Los Angeles. To him, she was invisible, a polite nod in the mornings, a distant thank you in the evenings. But tonight, she wasn't a housekeeper. Tonight, she was just a young woman with a blind date and a heart full of restless hope. Clutching her small purse, she slipped the last of her savings inside, just enough to cover parking, maybe a drink. She whispered a prayer under her breath, kissed her mother goodbye on the cheek, and promised she'd be home late. For once, her Sunday wouldn't be about folding laundry or helping her mother at the Boyle Heights Farmers Market. It would be about her. The drive into downtown felt endless. Her beat-up car rattled at every stoplight, the radio offering nothing but syrupy love songs that made her heart pound faster. By the time she reached the Golden Rose, a restaurant glowing like an oasis on a Los Angeles street corner, her stomach twisted with nerves. She wasn't used to marble floors and golden chandeliers. Her world was bleach-scented rags and grocery store budgets. But she had convinced herself this night could be different. Cole Ramirez, her mystery date, had promised he'd be waiting at a window table at 8 sharp. He had seemed kind over text, funny, hard-working, someone who understood simplicity. He had even promised to order something special for her. Maya clung to that promise as she walked into the restaurant at 7:55, her breath catching at the sight of crisp white linens, flickering candles, and couples laughing softly over plates she could never afford. The waiter's eyes scanned her from head to toe with a professional smile that felt slightly mocking. "This way, miss." His tone said everything she didn't belong. Still, she lifted her chin and followed him to the empty table by the window. She sat carefully, her purse clutched tightly, her heart beating like a trapped bird. At exactly 8 o'clock, she whispered to herself, "He'll walk in now." She stared at the door, expecting a man with kind eyes to appear. Minutes passed. The waiter returned, asking if she wanted to order. "Not yet," she said with a forced smile. By 8:15, her palms were damp. By 8:30, she was silently bargaining with herself, maybe traffic, maybe an emergency. She checked her phone over and over, scrolling through Cole's last text, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, beautiful." Those words had carried her through the week. Now they mocked her. Other couples raised glasses and toasts nearby, their laughter like knives in her ears. She shifted in her chair, her savings burning in her purse. A drink here would cost her half of it, but ordering nothing would mark her as an outsider even more. The waiter's polite mask was thinning into irritation. She was wasting his table. At 9:15, Maya knew the truth. Cole wasn't coming. The man who had filled her phone with promises had vanished without explanation. Her eyes burned as she bit her lip, determined not to cry in front of strangers. She repeated like a mantra, "Don't break here. Don't give them the satisfaction." Then her phone vibrated. Her heart leapt until she read the message. "Sorry, can't waste my time with a girl like you. We're not compatible. Good luck." The words hit harder than any slap. A girl like you. What did that mean, poor A-cleaner? A woman who didn't belong in golden restaurants. She swallowed hard, shoved her phone into her purse, and stood up on trembling legs. The dress that had made her feel special now clung like a costume. The shoes cut into her feet like punishment. Every whisper in the restaurant felt directed at her. Every laugh another reminder of her humiliation. She kept her head down, weaving between tables, desperate to escape. Her reflection flashed in the glass door, eyes, red cheeks, blotched dignity hanging by a thread. She whispered, "Just make it to the car." But someone had been watching her. From a corner booth, a pair of sharp gray eyes had followed every painful moment. Graham Whitmore had arrived an hour earlier for a dinner meeting that had been abruptly canceled. He had stayed only to finish reviewing contracts, but something had drawn his attention, a young woman at a window table clearly out of place, waiting with a fragile kind of hope. At first he couldn't place her. Then as she pushed back from the table and hurried toward the door, recognition struck him like lightning. It was Maya Delgado, his own housekeeper, the woman who had moved quietly through his Bel Air estate for 3 years, leaving behind polished glass, fresh linens, and silence. But tonight she wasn't in her work clothes or hiding behind a ponytail. Tonight she was vulnerable, luminous, even in her humiliation, and he saw her in a way he never had before. As she leaned against the wall near the exit, struggling to hold back tears, Graham felt something he hadn't in years, an urgent need to protect someone. His empire had been built on control, on keeping feelings out of the equation. But now, watching Maya fight to leave with dignity, his heart pounded with a reckless decision forming in his chest. Would he step forward and change her night and maybe his life forever? Maya tried to steady her breathing as she leaned against the wall, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her chest, but before she could push herself through the glass doors, she heard a familiar voice, low and calm, calling her name. She froze. That voice didn't belong to her date, and it wasn't her imagination either. Slowly she turned, and there stood Graham Whitmore, impeccably dressed in his navy suit, his piercing gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. Her first instinct was panic. This was her boss, the man who signed her paychecks, the man who barely noticed her existence at the Bel Air estate. And now of all nights he had to see her like this, broken, humiliated, standing in borrowed shoes that pinched her feet, in a dress that was never hers to claim. Her voice wavered as she whispered, "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know you were here." She quickly wiped at her ruined makeup, but it was no use. Her shame was written all over her face. To her surprise, Graham didn't offer judgment, or even that cool distance she was so used to. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Maya, you don't have to explain anything to me, but I can't just stand by while you're hurting." His words were so soft, so uncharacteristically gentle, that for a moment she couldn't believe they were real. This was the man who ruled boardrooms with iron composure, who built his empire on cold logic and efficiency. Yet here he was, looking at her as if she mattered. Maya shook her head, her voice cracking. "I'm fine. Really, I should go. I don't belong here." She tried to step away, but Graham's hand reached out instinctively, stopping just short of touching her arm as though he was afraid of crossing a line. "Please," he said, his tone carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "At least let me sit with you for a few minutes. No expectations. Just let me keep you company tonight." Her breath caught. She wanted to refuse to protect what little pride she had left, but something in his eyes, something raw, protective, almost pleading, made her nod. Without another word, Graham guided her back toward the table by the window, ignoring the curious glances from other diners. When they sat down, the space between them was thick with unspoken questions, but for the first time that evening, Maya felt a strange calm begin to settle. The waiter returned, his expression instantly changing when he realized Graham Whitmore himself was now seated at the table. Suddenly, the same man who had been impatient with Maya moments earlier transformed into a picture of courtesy, his tone dripping with respect. "Mr. Whitmore, will you and your guest be dining with us tonight?" Graham didn't hesitate. "Yes. Bring us the chef's recommendations and a bottle of your best red." His decisive tone left no room for debate. Maya's cheeks burned. "You don't have to do this," she murmured, but Graham turned toward her with a half smile that softened his usually stern face. "I want to. Tonight you deserve more than what you were given." As the food arrived, the conversation began hesitantly. Maya confessed in a whisper about Cole, about the cruel message that had shattered her. She expected Graham to remain silent, maybe awkward, but instead his jaw clenched, his voice firm. "Any man who would treat you like that isn't worth a second of your time. He doesn't know what he lost." There was no pity in his voice, only conviction, and that stirred something in her, that she hadn't felt in years dignity. She looked across the table and for the first time really saw him. Not the billionaire whose house she cleaned, but a man sitting there with his sleeves rolled back, slightly leaning forward, listening to her as if her words held value. He asked about her family, her childhood in El Paso, her dreams of someday owning a little house with a garden. And he didn't just listen, he absorbed every word, his gaze steady and intent, as though she were revealing secrets worth more than any deal he had ever signed. In return, Graham shared pieces of himself she never imagined. He spoke about growing up in a mansion that always echoed with emptiness, about parents who replaced affection with expectations. He admitted that he had built his empire not out of passion, but as a shield against loneliness. "I've been surrounded by people my entire life," he confessed, his voice low, "and yet I've never really felt seen. Until tonight." Maya's breath hitched at his words, her heart thundering as the air between them shifted. The restaurant seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them in a quiet bubble of understanding. She felt her walls crumbling, not because he demanded it, but because for the first time she didn't feel invisible. Hours slipped away. They laughed softly over stories, they sat in comfortable silences, and each glance held more weight than words ever could. Maya couldn't shake the thought that this moment was impossible, her, a housekeeper, and him, a billionaire. Yet the impossible was unfolding before her eyes, and she wasn't sure if she wanted it to stop. By the time they stepped outside, the city lights glittered, like 1,000 secrets waiting to be told. Graham walked her to her car, his presence both reassuring and unnerving. He stopped her just as she reached for the door handle, his voice trembling in a way she had never heard before. "Maya, I don't know what tomorrow will look like. I know our worlds are different, but tonight has changed something in me, and I can't pretend it hasn't." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She wanted to run to protect herself from disappointment, but she also wanted to believe him. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Scared that this is just kindness that tomorrow you'll forget." For a moment, Graham simply looked at her, his gray eyes illuminated by the glow of the street lamp. Then he leaned closer, his tone steady but vulnerable. "This isn't kindness, Maya. This is real." Before she could respond, he asked softly, "May I kiss you?" Her breath caught the world spinning around her, and in that fragile moment, the line between employer and employee, between two separate worlds, blurred into something uncharted. And as she whispered yes, everything changed. Do you think Maya should trust Graham's words, even though their worlds are so different? The night of that first kiss lingered in Maya's heart like a secret flame, but what followed tested them both in ways neither could have predicted. The next morning, she woke with her stomach in knots. Would Graham Whitmore, the man who had kissed her with such intensity under the glow of a Los Angeles street lamp, wake up regretting everything? Would he retreat into the walls of wealth and distance that had defined his life until then? She braced herself for the coldness of reality, but instead found him waiting in the kitchen when she arrived at his Bel Air estate. A single mug of coffee sat on the counter, prepared exactly how she liked it, even though she had never once told him her preference. When he smiled and said, "Good morning, beautiful," she felt her fears unravel. Over the next weeks, a quiet rhythm emerged. By day, she carried on with her duties. But once the staff left and the estate grew still, she and Graham would find each other. Sometimes they walked through the manicured gardens. Other nights, they stayed on the terrace under a sky lit with stars. He canceled meetings he would never have missed before just to share a meal with her. She discovered a man behind the billionaire image, one who craved laughter, warmth, and honesty. For the first time in her life, Maya felt truly chosen. But the outside world was not blind. Whispers began among the staff, then spread beyond the estate. Soon, Graham's family and business associates started to notice his absences, his distraction. One evening, his mother called from New York, her voice sharp with accusation. "You're risking everything, Graham. Your reputation, your company. This girl is not your equal. People will laugh at you." Graham clenched his jaw, responding with a steel she had never heard him use before. "She is worth more than every empty dinner I've ever attended. If they laugh, let them." But Maya overheard, and guilt coiled in her chest. Was she tearing his world apart? The test of their bond came when Graham invited her to a high society charity gala at the Regency Beverly Ballroom. It was the kind of event where every move was photographed, every guest scrutinized. Maya's instinct was to refuse. "I'll embarrass you," she whispered as she stood by the fountain in his garden. "I don't know their games, I don't belong there." But Graham took her hands and said with unwavering conviction, "I don't want you to be like them. I want you to be you. That's what they'll never understand." With trembling courage, she agreed. The night of the gala, Graham had arranged for a stylist to help her. When she walked down the staircase in a silk gown that shimmered like midnight, he was left speechless. Cameras flashed when they arrived, reporters shouting questions. Whispers rippled through the ballroom when the billionaire walked in, holding the hand of a woman who clearly wasn't from their world. Maya's heart nearly gave out when one of Graham's former flames, emboldened by privilege, sneered, "She's your date, how quaint." But before Maya could shrink, Graham pulled her close and said clearly, "This is Maya Delgado, the woman who has changed my life." The room fell into stunned silence. That night something shifted. Some judged her, others were intrigued, but none could ignore her authenticity. She laughed easily, spoke honestly, and carried herself with a grace born not of money, but of strength. By the end of the evening, even the most skeptical faces softened, charmed by the woman Graham had chosen. For Maya, the moment she realized she could hold her own in that glittering room felt like stepping into a destiny she had never dared dream. Still, not everyone accepted their love. Graham's family tried to intervene again, offering him a list of suitable women from elite families. Business partners hinted at consequences. Yet the more the world tried to tear them apart, the closer they grew. 6 months later, Graham brought her back to the Golden Rose, the restaurant where she had once been humiliated, and dropped to one knee by the very window where she had waited alone. With tears streaming down her face, Maya said yes, sealing a promise born from pain, but transformed into the purest joy. 2 years later, their story came full circle. In the garden of their Los Angeles home, surrounded by family and friends who had finally accepted their bond, they renewed their vows. Their daughter Ellie, with curls like her mother's and gray eyes like her father's, played among the flowers Maya had planted with her own hands. Graham whispered into Maya's ear as they watched her laugh, "I built empires and thought I was powerful, but you, Maya, you gave me a life worth living." As the sun set, Maya reflected on the journey that had begun with a cruel rejection and ended with a love that had defied every barrier. Sometimes blessings arrive dressed as heartbreak, she thought. That night, she fell asleep in Graham's arms, grateful for the fate that had turned humiliation into hope. Do you think love like this can survive in real life when two worlds collide? Did this story make you believe even more in the power of destiny? If you enjoyed it, comment the number 100 below and tell us what country you're watching from. And don't forget to share this story with someone who still believes in true love.